Montana, 1882. The land stretches wide and indifferent under a summer sky that offers no mercy. Miles of high grass bending in the wind. A ranch sitting low against the hills. Barn leaning. Fences patched with rope and good intentions. Cattle thin in the far field. Inside the kitchen, a woman stands at a cold stove. She is not small. She is not delicate. She carries herself the way people carry themselves, when the world has spent years trying to convince them they take up too much space. And they have decided finally to stop apologizing for it. In her hands, a cast iron skillet. 8 pounds of iron her mother pressed into her arms and said, "This is the only thing I own that never let me down." She sets it on the stove, looks at what she has married into. And somewhere 6 miles south, lights burning against the dark, the sound of 200 men working themselves hollow, with nothing real to eat. The plan begins. Wren Adler picked up the cast iron skillet and threw it. Not at the wall. Not yet. She held it first, both hands. 8 pounds of iron her mother had pressed into her arms the morning she left Dayton. "Take this," her mother had said. "It's the only thing I have that never let me down." Wren had carried it across 4 states. And now she was standing in a kitchen that smelled like old grease and silence. And the man she'd married 4 hours ago was somewhere outside, not looking at her. And the skillet was the only thing in the whole state of Montana she was absolutely sure of. She set it down on the stove. Careful, deliberate. Then she looked at what she'd married into. But that came later. First came the station. She'd arrived at duskfall at noon. No one waiting. Or rather, a wagon was waiting. Reed Calloway's wagon. With Reed Calloway sitting on the bench, looking at the middle distance like he was already somewhere else. He'd come down to collect her the way a man comes down. To collect something he'd ordered and wasn't entirely sure about anymore. He was big. That was the first thing. Not tall and lean big. Big the way old-growth timber is big. Broad through the shoulders, thick through the chest, with hands on the reins that looked like they'd been shaped by 25 years of working land that had no patience for softness. Dark hair going gray at the temples. A jaw that could have been cut from the same granite running through the hills behind his land. His face had the quality of something left outside in hard weather for a long time. Not ruined. Just permanently marked by it. He didn't smile, didn't offer his hand, looked at her trunk, then at her. Then at the trunk again, like he was doing arithmetic. Wren had been looked at like that her whole life, too much, too big, not the shape a man imagines when he lets himself imagine. She'd stopped flinching at it around age 19. Now she just looked back, steady and direct, until the other person had to decide what to do with that. Reed Calloway looked away first. He loaded her trunk without a word. She climbed up to the bench without waiting for help. Because she had not traveled 4 states to be a woman who waited to be handed up into things. The drive to Calloway Creek took an hour and 40 minutes. He said 11 words the entire time. She counted. Roads rough past the creek. Hold the rail if you need to. That was it. 1 hour and 40 minutes of Montana opening up around them. High summer grass bending in the wind. Dry creek beds with rocks bleached pale as old bone. Fence lines that started and kept going until they disappeared into the horizon, like they'd decided the horizon was the destination. A hawk rode a thermal so high it became a mark against the sky. Then nothing. Wren breathed in the space of it. Big enough, she thought. Big enough for what I need to do. She watched the land instead of him. Because the land was telling her things he wasn't. It was telling her the size of what was possible out here. It was telling her that a place this indifferent to human opinion was, in its own way, an invitation. Prove yourself to the land. The land doesn't care what you weigh. The wedding had happened before all of this. 11 minutes in the town magistrate's office. Walls needing paint, a desk buried in paper. One witness named Carlisle who kept his hat on and smelled like a difficult morning. Reed signed the registry the way he probably signed feed invoices. Quick, done. Already somewhere else in his head. Wren signed her name beneath his in careful deliberate letters. WREN. ADLER. She crossed it out, dipped the pen again, WRENCALLOWAY. Set the pen down, looked at what she'd written, 26 years old. $51 in a handkerchief inside her corset. A trunk holding 2 dresses, 1 cast iron skillet, and a notebook packed with numbers and recipes and plans she'd been writing since she was 15, and her mother got sick, and somebody had to start paying attention to how things actually worked. She had not come to Montana expecting flowers. She'd come expecting a kitchen, a ranch with problems she could fix, A man who would stay out of her way long enough for her to fix them. 2 out of 3 wasn't terrible. The ranch came into view around a long bend in the road. Wren kept her face very still. The barn leaned. Not dramatically. Not in any way that said collapse was imminent. But enough. Enough that you could see it had been losing the argument with gravity for a while, and had quietly stopped trying. The fence along the near pasture had been patched in 4 places with wire, rope, and what appeared to be good intentions. The cattle in the far field were thin. Not starving, not yet, but wearing the particular look of animals that had been asked to make do for longer than was fair. The house had once been proud of itself. 2 stories, solid timber, a porch running the full front length. But the porch roof sagged on the left side. 3 posts needed replacing. The paint had given up sometime around 1877 and hadn't been invited to try again. Reed pulled the wagon to a stop. "It needs work," he said, to the yard. Not to her. "Yes," Wren said, "I can see that." He turned. First time he'd really looked at her since duskfall. Something moved in his face. Not shame exactly, but adjacent to it. The expression of a man who knows what he owes and hasn't worked out how to pay. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "did you bring me out here to fail?" He blinked. Whatever he'd been prepared for her to say. That wasn't it. "No," he said. "Then we understand each other." She climbed down from the wagon before he thought to offer, and walked toward the house and did not look back. The kitchen broke something in her. She gave herself 30 seconds of that. Exactly 30. She counted, and then she got to work. The stove was iron, heavy, capable of running hot for 12 hours if someone bothered to maintain it. The flue was choked with soot. The firebox smelled like it hadn't seen wood in weeks. The work table was solid pine underneath the grime. Good bones, bad neglect. 3 shelves on the east wall held the saddest provisions she'd seen outside a field hospital. Salt pork. A sack of cornmeal caked at the bottom. 2 unlabeled tins. A jar of lard with a film across the surface. She opened the jar, sniffed it. Still good. Barely, but still. 9 men moved through the yard in the gray afternoon light, doing the slow, unconvinced work of people who'd lost faith in the point of it. Wren had seen that before. She knew exactly what it looked like. It looked like men who hadn't eaten a real meal in a very long time. She cleaned the flue first. Ash came down in black clouds that got in her hair, her dress, her eyes. She cleaned those too. Found firewood stacked against the outside of the house. Not much, but enough. Built the fire slow and let the stove heat properly. While she went through every shelf, every tin, every corner of that larder with the particular focus of a woman who'd learned that kitchens almost always hold more than they show. You just have to know where to look. 3rd shelf, back corner, behind a broken crock, a cloth sack of dried beans, good ones. Behind the salt pork tin, a smaller tin sealed with wax. Flour, 1.5 pounds, maybe 2. Top of the larder, pushed so far back she needed a crate to reach. A sealed tin of lard. And next to it, a small jar of dried herbs that still had some smell left. Not much. Enough. She stood in the larder holding a jar of old herbs and felt something settle in her chest. "You work with what you have," she told herself. "You always have. That's never been the part that stopped you." By 3 in the afternoon, beans were soaking, cornbread batter was resting, and the kitchen smelled like something warm for the first time in what she suspected was months. She could hear the men slowing as they passed the window. That involuntary pause when a smell reaches a person who's been doing without. She called them in at 6. They came the way people come when they've been let down before. Careful, sideways about it. 9 of them, ranging from what looked like 53 down to clearly not yet 18, moving into the kitchen with the shuffling uncertainty of people who weren't sure they were allowed to want what they were smelling. She'd set the table for 8. They were 9. She ran 2 shifts and said nothing about it. Nobody spoke for a while. Then the boy said something. 17, maybe. Slight. Quiet in the specific way of someone who'd learned that going unnoticed was how you stayed safe. Dark eyes that caught everything. He'd told her his name was Jasper earlier, in the flat tone of someone who answered direct questions honestly and didn't offer anything beyond that. He ate 3 bites, looked at his bowl, said, "Ma'am," that was all. One word with a quality of sincerity so complete it had no room for anything else. Wren turned back to the stove before he could see her face. The big one. Big Shaw, she'd heard someone say, though not the story behind it yet, ate through the first shift and pushed his bowl 2 inches in her direction without making eye contact. She refilled it without comment. He nodded once. She filed it away. A man who's already decided you won't last, Doesn't push his bowl towards you on the first night. Reed came in last. She heard him stop in the doorway. That brief, particular stillness, like a man who needs a beat between the unexpected and his response to it. She didn't look up. Ladled his bowl, poured his coffee. Set both at the end of the table and went back to the basin. The only sounds for a while were his fork and the stove settling and the Montana night arriving outside. Then, "This is better than I expected." She turned. "The food? All of it," said to the table. Not quite to her yet, but closer than before. "What were you expecting?" she said. Long pause. "Cold beans mostly. From before I came's." "Yes, how long?" Another pause, heavier than the first, longer than it should have been. She turned back to the basin, didn't push. Some truths needed to be left in the room, long enough to breathe before you reached for them. She had time. She was married. She wasn't going anywhere. "I'll need to go to town." "I'll need to go to town. Proper provisions. I'll take you. You don't have to." "I know. I will, anyway." He stood. The room adjusted around him when he moved, the particular gravity of a very large man in a not large space. "You did well tonight, Mrs. Calloway." 4 words. She could hear what they cost him. Not the saying exactly, but the choice to say the true thing rather than nothing. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway." "Reed." He paused at the doorway. "We're married. You can call me Reed." "Reed," she said. Something moved across his face, gone too fast to name. He nodded once and left, and she stood listening to his boots on the hall floor and thought, there is an entire man in there I don't know yet. A man with a failing ranch and a jaw set hard against whatever he's carrying. A man who just said 4 honest words, and they cost him something real. She finished washing up. She didn't go to bed until past midnight. She'd been looking for a pen. That was all. She wanted to write down the provision list before the quantities blurred in her memory, and the small room off the kitchen that served as Reed's desk was the most likely place to find one. The saddlebag was hanging on the back of the chair, open. The ledger inside it was open too, laid flat the way books land when someone sets them down in a hurry and means to come back. Wren was not the kind of woman who could unsee numbers. She stood in the doorway, didn't cross the threshold, didn't touch anything, just read what was visible from where she stood, with the particular clarity of a person who has been doing arithmetic in her head since she was 15 years old, because arithmetic was the one language the world couldn't argue with. What she read was enough. The Calloway Creek Ranch had been solid once. She could see it in the earlier columns. Cattle sales holding steady, feed accounts cleared on time, the margins of a man who understood his land and kept his books straight. Then something shifted. She found the year after Nora Calloway died. After 1880, the numbers told a different story. Feed costs creeping upward, cattle sales falling short of what the herd size should produce, accounts in duskfall running long past due, interest accumulating at the edges the way rust works, quiet, consistent, never announcing itself until the damage is done. She ran the most recent entries in her head. No paper needed. 4 months, maybe fewer. That was what the ranch had before the Duskfall Bank came for what it was owed. Wren stood in that doorway for a long moment. Then she found a pen in the kitchen drawer, where she'd been looking to begin with, sat down at the work table and opened her notebook. Wrote the provision list first. Then turned to a fresh page and wrote something else entirely. One question at the top. What is this ranch actually worth if someone runs it right? One question below that. What is the land 6 miles south producing that nobody out here has thought to sell to? She already knew the answer to the second question. She'd seen it on the drive-in. The lights of the Pacific Northern Railroad work camp, steady against the dark. Men doing the hardest physical labor in the territory. 12-hour days under a Montana summer that offered no apologies. Men like that needed to eat. Hot food. Real food. Not whatever the company cook was pushing out of a barrel at noon. She knew what it felt like to be the person nobody expected to last. She'd been that person in every kitchen she'd ever walked into, every boarding house, every hospital galley, every town that took one look at her and saw too much of the wrong things. She'd learned that the only answer to being underestimated was work. Not the quiet kind. The kind that made itself impossible to ignore. She ran the numbers in her head. Cost of flour from a bulk supplier, dried beans by the sack, salt pork at volume, coffee, the appetite of a man doing heavy grading in July heat. She knew that from hospital kitchens, where she'd fed men who'd done hard labor and needed 4,000 calories a day to stay useful, what a man would pay for something hot and honest when his only other option was whatever Pacific Northern was calling food. She wrote for an hour. When she finished, she looked at what she had. Looked at it again. Then she closed the notebook, blew out the candle, and lay back in the dark. For the first time since leaving Dayton, Ohio, on a train heading somewhere she'd never been to marry a man she'd never met. She felt something that wasn't quite peace, but was close enough to let her sleep. She was up before the rooster, not because she couldn't sleep. She'd slept well, the deep, uncomplicated sleep of a person whose mind has landed on solid ground. She was up because there was work, and the work didn't wait on daylight. By the time the first gray came through the kitchen window, the stove was going, biscuit dough resting under a cloth, oats on the heat. She'd also retrieved the night before a tin of dried apricots from under the larder floorboard. Third board from the left, as she'd discovered during her second, more thorough inventory by candlelight. The kind of inventory you do when the first one was rushed, and you've since learned that this kitchen rewards patience. She had the apricots simmering down with water, and the last of the sugar from the bottom of a tin nobody had thought to look inside. She had honey, retrieved that morning from the top of the far cabinet, standing on an upturned crate to reach it, in a kitchen that smelled like warm oats and something almost sweet, and thought, this is either the beginning of something or the end of everything, and only one of those is acceptable. She got the honey. Jasper appeared in the doorway at 5:15, stopped, looked at the pot of apricots, the honey jar, the tray of biscuits going into the oven. You found the apricots, under the third board, like you said. I hadn't said yet, you were up in the night. I was up thinking about other things. The apricots were convenient. He sat down at the work table with the expression of a person who has decided to stop being surprised and simply lean into whatever comes next. Jasper, she said. Ma'am. Tell me about the railroad camp. He looked up. She was already at the stove, not looking at him, which she'd noticed was how he talked most easily, when the conversation wasn't pointed directly at him. 6 miles south, Pacific Northern. They're grading the section between here and the Harlan Creek Junction, supposed to run through to October. How many men? 200 and something. Maybe 220. Who feeds them? Company does. Cook wagon men complain about it. What do they say? His mouth moved, that a man could get more out of eating his own boot. Wren turned back to the stove. Good, she said. He was quiet a moment. You're going to go down there. Not a question. Thursday, after town. Can I come? She looked at him over her shoulder. Yes, she said, you can come. The men filed in at 6, and what happened at that table was something Wren kept. She'd learned long ago to hold on to the small pivot points, the moments when a room shifts from one thing to something else, and you can feel the air pressure change before anything else does. She'd stirred the honey into the oatmeal, set out the biscuits with a jar of apricot preserves she'd made in 20 minutes from the dried fruit and sugar and a little water. Not perfect, close enough to real that it didn't matter. Big Shaw sat down, looked at his bowl, looked at the biscuits, looked at the jar. Is this a joke? It's breakfast, Jasper said. Already eating. Where'd she get preserves? Made them this morning. Shaw looked at Wren. She was pouring coffee and paying him no apparent attention. This morning, he said again. Not quite a question. Apricots under the larder floorboard, she said without turning. Third board from the left. Silence. Then the oldest man at the table, she'd clocked him as the one the others watched for cues, the benchmark of what was acceptable, said, I've been in that larder 1,000 times. You weren't looking right, she said pleasantly. Something shifted at that table. Not dramatically. Not the way things shift in stories where the moment announces itself. The way air pressure changes before weather changes. First one thing, then everything following. These men had been surviving. They'd forgotten, somewhere in the grinding sameness of cold food and diminishing work, and a boss carrying something heavier than he let on. They'd forgotten that surviving and living were different things. She was reminding them. One meal at a time. Reed came in last. He paused in the kitchen doorway, the same as the night before, with that fraction of a second between arrival and entry she'd noted it. Filed it away as simply how he moved through spaces that surprised him. She didn't look up, poured his coffee, set it beside his place. Preserves, he said. Apricots, from under the larder floorboard. I didn't know there were apricots. You knew there was a floorboard. He sat. She set his bowl down. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said her name, her first name for the first time. Just like that, without working up to it. Wren. There are things I've let fall here, he said, more than just the kitchen. She sat down across from him. His eyes came up fast. She could see he hadn't expected that. But she'd decided that morning that certain conversations needed to happen face to face, and waiting for him to start them was a losing approach. "I know," she said. "I saw your ledger. Still, I wasn't looking for it. The pen. It was open on the chair in your desk room." She held his gaze. "I'm not the kind of woman who can unsee numbers." The kitchen was quiet. They were alone. The men had drifted back out to work. "The ranch is in trouble," she said. "Not cruel, not soft. True in the way numbers are true. Not ruin. Not yet. But the margins are thin and getting thinner, and cold beans 3 meals a day is what happens when a man is watching too many things fall at once and running out of hands." His jaw worked. "I'm not saying it to shame you," she said. "I'm saying it because I have a plan, and I need you to hear it." He looked at her the way a man looks at something he's not sure he can afford to want. "You've been here 2 days," he said. "I know. You have numbers," she said. "Numbers are better than plans. Plans you can argue with. Numbers just are." She opened her notebook, put it between them, turned it so he could read. He read it. She watched his face while he did. Careful, thorough. The way a man reads something he's trying to find the flaw in because the thing seems too straightforward to be real. He looked up. The railroad camp. 6 miles south. 200 plus men doing hard labor in summer heat. The company cook is feeding them badly enough that they complain about it at the Duskfall feed store. "Hale Provisions has that contract," he said. "I know. Denton Hale's had it for 8 years. He doesn't share. He doesn't feed those men properly either, and Foreman Galt knows it, and Pacific Northern knows it, and everyone's been pretending it's fine, because no one's offered an alternative." She paused. "I'm the alternative." Reed sat back and looked at her, really looked, the way he hadn't since she'd stepped off the wagon at Duskfall. "You want to go down there? Thursday, after town, a test batch, 40 servings. Hale's contract covers the whole site. I know that too, but there's more than one way to get food to a hungry man. And I have been finding ways around closed doors since I was 15 years old." The stove ticked. Outside, the ranch was building toward morning, hooves and voices and the sound of work resuming. "Thursday," Reed said finally. "I'll drive you. I can drive myself." "I know." He stood, put his hat on. "I'll drive you anyway." He walked out, and Wren sat at the table with her notebook and the fading smell of apricot preserves and fresh biscuits, and she thought, this is going to work. Not because she was certain, because she had never, not once in 26 years, let the possibility that it might not stop her from starting. She turned to a fresh page, started on the menu. She found him on the porch that night. Or rather, he found her. She'd stepped outside after the washing up was done, kneading the sky after the closed-in heat of the kitchen, and Jasper was already there, sitting on the porch step with his back against the post, looking at the hills. He didn't say anything when she came out. She sat on the step at the other end and they were quiet together for a while, which she'd already noticed was how Jasper was most comfortable. After a while he said, "There's something you should probably know." She waited. About why the broom closet off the main hall is always locked, and why Reed doesn't go in the kitchen before dark if he can help it. She looked at him. He was watching the hills. His wife, Jasper said, Nora. She died in the winter of '79, her and the baby both. He paused. He went to Duskfall to get the doctor. Roads were frozen. Took him 4 hours. When he got back, he stopped. He was too late, Wren said. Yes. She sat with that for a moment. The broom closet? Used to be her sewing room. He locked it after. Nobody goes in. Jasper picked at the edge of the porch step. The kitchen. She liked to cook. Used to have it going by the time he came in from the morning check. Said the smell of it was the best part of the day. Wren looked out at the dark yard. He lets the biscuits go cold, she said. Not a question. She'd noticed it. Reed always ate after the men, never when the food was at its best. He doesn't like to smell it hot, Jasper said. Not since. She was quiet for a long time. She thought about what it cost a man to write to a matrimonial agency, to invite a stranger into the house where his wife had died. To sit across a table from someone who smelled like apricot preserves and fresh cornbread when for 3 years the kitchen had been cold. She thought about the 11 words on the drive from Duskfall and understood them differently now. She was not angry. She was not sorry for herself. She felt something closer to a kind of steady clarity. She had not come here to be Nora Calloway. She had not come here to restore something lost. She'd come here to build something new, in the space available, with the materials on hand. And this, a man still carrying 1879 with him everywhere he went, This was simply one more material to account for. "Jasper," she said. "Ma'am. You've been here 14 months? "Yes." "Before that?" "Nowhere much." He said it with the ease of someone who'd made their peace with that answer long ago. She looked at this boy. 17, watchful, already fluent in the language of places trying to hold together. "The men were thinking of leaving," he said. "Some of them. Before you came." She waited. "I don't think they're thinking about it anymore," he said. She nodded. "Didn't make a thing of it." "Get some sleep," she said. "I'll need you early Thursday." He stood, went inside, and Wren stayed on the porch step and looked up at the Montana sky, which was enormous in a way that Ohio never had been. Stars so thick and close, they looked like something that had always been there, waiting for a person to be standing in exactly the right place to finally see them. She thought about the ledger, the numbers, the railroad camp 6 miles south. She thought about Reed Calloway eating his biscuits cold because the smell of them warm still belonged to someone else. She thought, "I can work with this. Not fix it, you don't fix grief, but work with it. Give the kitchen a new smell, a new reason, new purpose laid in carefully over the old wound without trying to cover what was already there." She could do that. She went back inside, opened the notebook to the page with the railroad numbers, ran them again. She closed the notebook, blew out the candle. Outside, Montana went on being enormous. Inside, Wren Adler Calloway lay in the dark and was, for the first time in a long time, exactly where she'd meant to be. Thursday came in hard, not warm, not the kind of summer morning that eases you in and gives you room to prepare. The heat was already sitting on the land when Wren stepped into the yard at 5:30, the sky pale and flat and offering no sympathy. She had 2 large kettles packed in the wagon bed, nested in straw so they wouldn't shift on the road. 40 servings of beef and beans stew, thick, real, hot enough to hold for 2 hours if she kept the lids seated right. Biscuits, wrapped in cloth and packed tight in a wooden crate. A coffee urn she'd borrowed from the Duskfall General Store through Jasper, who had apparently spent Tuesday making himself useful to every person in that town through means she decided not to examine too closely. Jasper was already in the wagon, sitting straight, trying not to look like anything in particular. He was nervous, so was she. She was not going to say that out loud. Reed came out of the barn and stopped when he saw the wagon bed, looked at the kettles, the crates, the urn, the folded stack of tin cups tucked into a flour sack. "You packed for an army," he said. "I packed for 40, plus 2 extra in case I miscounted." He studied her face. She looked straight ahead at the road. "You're not nervous," he said. Not a question, an observation he wasn't sure about. "I'm terrified," she said, "but I don't let that run things." He was quiet for a beat. Then he climbed up to the bench and picked up the reins without another word, and they moved out into the flat morning light, the wagon rolling south through grass that was already beginning to bronze at the tips from the heat, the hills in the distance still holding their blue. The railroad camp was louder than she'd expected. That was the first thing that hit her, the sheer noise of it. Hundreds of men and animals and machines working simultaneously in the crushing midday heat, the sound so layered and dense it landed against your chest before you'd even stopped the wagon. Steel on stone, shouted counts, the rhythmic percussion of grading work that paused for nothing and no one, least of all a woman arriving with kettles of stew and a notebook full of figures she believed in. Wren felt the scale of it settle on her, just for a second, just long enough to be real. Then she breathed through it, squared her shoulders, went back to the numbers in her head. 40 portions. 12 cents cost each, $1 charged each. The arithmetic didn't change because the camp was loud. Reed found Foreman Galt near the supply line, and she could see them from where she stood. Reed's height and Galt's stocky, no patience frame, 2 men negotiating the arrival of an idea that hadn't been invited. She didn't wait for the negotiation to finish. She started unloading. Both kettles down herself before either man thought to offer. Biscuit crate positioned, coffee urn set and ready. Tin cups laid in a row with the efficiency of a person who had done exactly this in hospital galleys and boarding house yards and once in a church basement during a spring flood, and had learned that standing around, waiting for permission to be useful, was its own kind of failure. Galt came over. He was the kind of man whose face had settled years ago into the permanent expression of someone expecting to be disappointed by whatever came next. Red-faced, no patience visible anywhere on him. the look of a foreman who had been managing the impossible for so long that impossible was simply his starting point. He looked at the setup, looked at Wren, looked back at the setup. $1 a plate, he said. $1 a plate, she confirmed. Company cook charges 50 cents.
Company cook,
She said, is why your men are dragging by 2 in the afternoon. She ladled a portion into a cup she'd brought for exactly this purpose, held it out. Try it. He looked at the cup the way a man looks at something he wants to refuse but can't find a sufficient reason. It won't bite you, mister. He took it, ate a spoonful, then another. His face didn't change, not a muscle, but something behind it did. Something recalculated. Send me 15, he said. Men don't complain, we talk Monday. I brought 40. I said 15, Mr. Galt. She kept her voice level, the tone of a woman who has done the work and knows it. Your crew is 218 men working through the hottest stretch of summer, on a section Jasper tells me is already 10 days behind schedule. Galt glanced at Jasper. Jasper looked at the sky with great interest. 15 meals today tells you nothing useful, Wren continued. 40 will, and I'll charge you for 35 if they're not all eaten. He looked at her for a long moment, the look of a man deciding whether the math she was offering was better than the math he already had. Then he turned around and shouted something at the nearest crew. Within 6 minutes there were men forming a line. Wren served all 40 portions in 22 minutes. The coffee ran out at 30. She was already repacking the empty kettles when Galt came back, hands in his pockets, wearing the look of a man revising something he'd been certain about. $40, she said before he opened his mouth. Hand out. Palm up. He counted it, bill by bill, coin by coin, placed it in her hand. She closed her fingers around it, $40. In 22 minutes, she did not let her hand shake. Same time Monday, she said. Bring coffee for 55. He nodded once, walked away. She looked at the $40 in her hand, then she put it in her apron pocket and started on the wagon. On the drive home, Reed held the reins and the sun dropped behind the western hills, and the road back to Callaway Creek ran gold in the late light. Neither of them spoke for a long time, the particular quiet of two people sitting with something that doesn't need immediate words. Finally he said, $40. 40, she said. In one afternoon, 22 minutes to be precise. He looked at her. She looked at the road. Your best cattle week last month, she said, was $23. I read the whole ledger the night I found it. Silence. Wren, he said. She turned. His face held something she hadn't seen in it before. Not gratitude, not admiration. Something that lived in the neighborhood of both, but hadn't decided yet what it was going to be. Don't say anything yet, she said. Monday I'm bringing 55. By end of month I want 2 wagons running. I need to talk to you about hiring Opal Marsh. She's a widow in Duskfall. 2 daughters, good hands, needs the work. And we need to look at the Helena supply route, because Morrison's pricing doesn't hold at volume, and if I'm buying bulk I should be. Wren. Negotiating direct, and we need to talk about the account balance because the cash flow timing matters and, Wren. She stopped. He was looking at her the way he'd looked at that first bowl of beans and cornbread. Like a man who thought he knew what he'd ordered and has just understood he did not. Come inside when we get home, he said. We'll talk through all of it. I also need 2 bigger pots, she said. Cast iron, 10 quart if the Helena catalog has them. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, the honest precursor to one. 2 pots, he said. All right. Monday she brought 55 portions. Everyone gone before the coffee urn was half empty. She found Opal Marsh on a Tuesday, a compact, capable woman of 46 with steady hands and the particular self-possession of someone who had been managing harder things than most people knew about, alone for longer than was fair. They sat across from each other at a table in Opal's kitchen and talked for an hour. Wren showed her the numbers. Opal asked 3 specific questions, all of them good. By the time Wren left, Opal and her older daughter Cecily, 19, fierce, the kind of focused that comes from having been waiting for real work without knowing what to call it, were hired on for the second wagon starting the following week. Wednesday, Foreman Galt met her at the edge of camp before she'd stopped the wagon. Hat in hand, she'd learned already that Galt put his hat in his hand when he was about to say something he hadn't planned on saying. Denton Hale knows you're here, he said. She kept unloading. I assumed he would. He's not happy. I assumed that too. He has a contract, Mrs. Calloway. He has a contract with Pacific Northern Railroad, she said. Not with the men. The men are buying their noon meal with their own money on their own time outside company property. That's not a contract issue, that's commerce. Galt was quiet a moment. You've thought about this. I think about everything. Can't seem to stop. He almost smiled. He'll come himself. You know that. Good, she said. Tell him to bring an appetite. Denton Hale came on Friday. She'd been expecting someone who ran on volume. Someone who'd held an 8-year monopoly on railroad provisioning by force of personality and the willingness to be unpleasant about it. She'd prepared for loud. Denton Hale was not loud. He was 50, or near it. Lean. A suit that cost more than the wagon she was standing beside. Gray at the temples in a way that looked intentional. His face had spent decades learning that calm was more durable than anger, more effective than threat, harder to argue against than either. He walked toward her without hurrying, which was itself a kind of pressure. She kept serving, didn't stop, didn't look up until he was directly in front of her. Mrs. Calloway, he said, like her name was something he'd been holding for a while. I've been hearing about you, Mr. Hale. She handed a tin cup of coffee to the man at the front of the line. I've been hearing about you too. Then we have a starting point. That careful smile. I'd like to make you an offer. I'm working, she said. You can talk while I work. Something shifted in his eyes. Not offense. Something more like a recalibration. A slight adjustment to the approach. $350, he said. For your equipment, your supplier contacts, and your agreement to stop operating within 20 miles of any Pacific Northern active site. Wren served 2 more portions, made change for a crumpled bill. Refilled a cup. No, she said, that's a significant sum. I know what it is. More than you'll earn before the grading season. I know what it is, Mr. Hale. She looked at him directly for the first time. The answer is no. He studied her the way a man studies an equation that keeps giving him the wrong answer. Montana Territory is large, he said, quiet and reasonable, the tone of a man who has never needed to raise his voice to get what he wants. But Pacific Northern runs through most of it. Wherever that railroad goes, my contract goes with it. Then, she said, I expect we'll be seeing each other regularly. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, put his hat back on, and walked away without hurrying, as if he'd simply noted something in a ledger and would return to it at a time of his choosing. That was what unsettled her. Not anger, not threats. The complete, unhurried calm of a man who had never lost this kind of argument before and saw no reason to change his expectations now. She turned back to her line, kept serving, but she started paying attention to everything. The first sign came the following week. Morrison's Dry Goods in Duskfall, her primary supplier for 3 weeks running, without incident, suddenly had no flour, not low, not delayed. No flour as in none, as in hadn't had any and didn't know when to expect more and was very sorry about the inconvenience and could not quite hold eye contact while saying so. She drove 8 miles east to the next supplier. Same answer, different face, same inability to meet her eyes. She did the arithmetic on the drive home. He moves fast, she thought, and he moves through other people. She told herself, adjust, find a Helena contact, pay the higher freight cost, absorb it, recalculate the margin. She did exactly that. Wrote to a Helena supplier that afternoon, sent the letter with Jasper the next morning, had a confirmed order by Thursday. Cost her 30% more per hundredweight than Morrison's. She restructured the menu to compensate, 3 core items instead of 5, tighter portions on the expensive cuts, more beans to carry the protein, and didn't miss a single service. Then the axle. The rear left axle on the second wagon. The one Opal and Cecily were running, snapped on the road to camp on a Tuesday morning. Not at a joint, not along a grain, not in any of the ways wood fails under honest strain. A clean break, too clean. The kind that happens with intention and a saw and someone working in the dark. Jasper found the tell when he went to assess the damage. Brought the broken piece to the kitchen without speaking, set it on the work table. Wren turned it over in her hands, looked at the cut. How long to fix, she said. 2 days if I leave for the park now, he said. Go now, she said. Go today. He went. She stood at the work table and looked at the piece of axle. And then she opened her notebook and wrote down everything that had happened since Hale's visit. The flour, the axle, dates, sequence. The cost of each incident estimated conservatively. She wrote it in columns, not because columns helped her think, but because this was going to matter later, and later it needed to be legible to someone else. Big Shaw appeared in the kitchen doorway an hour later, set a cup of coffee on the work table without being asked. Stood against the far wall with his arms folded. Hale, he said. Not a question. Most likely, she said. You going to back down? She looked up at him. This man who had pushed his bowl toward her for a second helping on the first night. Who had moved in the past 4 weeks from waiting for her to fail to something she recognized as a kind of considered respect. The kind that isn't given, only earned. What do you think? She said. He looked at her for a moment. I think, he said, slow and deliberate, that Hale has never gone up against someone who kept better books than he does. She almost smiled. Get some sleep, Shaw, she said. I need everyone on time tomorrow. She'd already been running the Saturday service in Duskfall for 2 weeks by then. That had been its own idea, a second revenue line that didn't depend on the railroad camp at all. Duskfall had 400 residents, a hotel dining room that shut at 7, and 60 miners cycling in from the Garfield Ridge operation every weekend with wages and nowhere decent to spend them on food. She'd arranged the empty lot behind the Brixton Hotel from the owner, a compact, humorless man named Brixton, who responded to propositions with controlled suspicion, but had no argument against numbers that made sense. $8 flat per Saturday for use of the lot. She brought everything else. First Saturday, 38 people. Second Saturday, 52. The third Saturday was the night the real trouble arrived. 61 people in the lot behind the Brixton Hotel on that third Saturday. 3 deep at the serving line for the first 40 minutes. Wren on the ladle, Opal on the biscuits, Cecily handling the coffee and the money, because Cecily was quick and sharp and Wren had trusted her immediately, which she almost never did with money. Almost. Because Cecily was 19 and managing a fast line with bad lantern light, and people pressing in from both sides, and bills coming across the board faster than anyone could inspect them properly. And someone had calculated exactly that. Wren noticed the man midway through the service, or rather, she noticed his hands. He paid for 3 portions, held out the bills with the specific, deliberate care of someone who wants the transaction finished, and the attention moved on. His jacket had the look of a working miner. His hands did not. Too smooth. No calluses. No pitch or grit worked into the skin the way it works into the hands of men who do that kind of labor every day. He was gone by the time the thought completed itself. She was already serving next person, and the next, and the line didn't stop for intuitions. On the wagon road home, Jasper driving, Opal and Cecily in the wagon bed, Cecily asleep against her mother's shoulder with the complete efficiency of someone who could crash hard after working hard. Wren counted the night's take. $23 short, she counted again. Still short. She pulled the bills from the bottom of the cash box and held each one up to the wagon lantern and went through them one at a time with the focused attention of a woman who had been paying close attention to money since she was 15 because no one else was going to do it for her. There. 2 of them. $20 bills. Wrong weight. The ink slightly off in color, not enough to catch in motion, in noise, in a line moving too fast for careful examination. More than enough to catch when you were holding them still in lamplight and looking. Counterfeit. She folded them separately, put them in her apron pocket, opened her notebook, wrote down everything she remembered about the man. Height, build, the jacket, the hat, the specific way he'd stood, like someone performing a posture rather than inhabiting one. The fact that he'd ordered 3 portions but she hadn't seen him eat. He'd taken the food and the change and been gone within 2 minutes. He hadn't come hungry, he'd come to create a problem. Jasper, she said. He straightened. Ma'am, first thing tomorrow I need you to ask at the Brixton Hotel whether anyone saw a man fitting this description come through this week. She described him. Not a miner. Smooth hands. Watching the line more than waiting in it. Jasper was quiet a moment. Is something wrong? Something is beginning to be wrong, she said. I want to understand what it is before it finishes starting. She was at the kitchen table when Reed came in from the late cattle check. She laid the 2 bills flat on the work table without preamble. He picked them up, held them to the lamp, set them down. When? He said. Tonight? He ordered 3 plates, paid with 2 bad 20s, took $6 real change and disappeared. Hale, possibly, or someone working for him, or someone who simply heard about the service and wanted to see how careful I was. She looked at the bills. Now they know. Reed sat down. The quality of his quiet had changed. Tighter, more alert, the way he probably went quiet when something on the ranch needed his full attention at 2 in the morning. What do you want to do? He said. I want to go to the sheriff's office in Duskfall tomorrow. Not to file a complaint, to put it on record. 2 bills, a description, the date, the location. Official notation. Because if this connects to Hale, having it documented before any contract dispute protects us. And if it happens again, the pattern is already on paper. He looked at her across the work table. That look again. The one she'd come to recognize as the look he got when he was revising his understanding of something and knew he was going to have to update the revision again later. You thought through all of that already, he said. I think through everything, she said. It's involuntary. At this point, the sheriff's office the next morning took 40 minutes. She stated the facts, handed over the bills. The deputy wrote everything down with the careful attention of someone who was actually listening. She was back at the wagon by 10 and found that Morrison's Dry Goods had received a flour delivery and was perfectly cheerful and cooperative, as if the previous week's shortage had never happened. She bought her flour, said nothing about the gap, but she put the date in the notebook. Then, 3 days later, the note. Jasper brought it in from the gate. A folded piece of paper left before dawn, no envelope, no name. 4 words, you should go home. She read it, folded it, placed it in the back of the notebook beside the counterfeit bills and the sheriff's receipt. Then she turned to the stove. The men would be up in an hour. The biscuits weren't going to make themselves. Reed came down at 6. Looked at her face, then at the stove, then back at her face. What happened? He said. She slid the folded note across the work table without speaking. He read it, set it down. Something hardened in his jaw. Wren, I'm not going home, she said. I am home. He looked at her. She pulled the biscuits from the oven and set them on the rack. And the kitchen filled with that smell. Warm and settled and completely certain of itself. I know, Reed said quietly. I know you are. The thing about Denton Hale, she decided, was patience. That was what made him genuinely dangerous. Not the tactics themselves, the flour, the axle, the bills, the note. Those were levers, each one calibrated. The moves of a man who had been in this specific business long enough to know exactly how much pressure to apply before the next step. He wasn't panicking. He was working a process that had succeeded before. Wren knew she had to move faster than his process. She'd been building something quietly for 4 weeks. Every service, every day, she'd been tracking numbers that had nothing to do with her own accounts. Which sections of the grading crew were eating her food and which were still on Hale's wagon. Output measurements she'd started reconstructing from conversations with Galt. What he mentioned about pace, which sections were ahead, which were behind. What the baseline looked like versus what she was seeing in the sections she supplied. She'd been careful about it, never asked directly. Let him offer the information in the natural course of conversation, then wrote it down the moment she was back in the wagon. Sections she supplied, running 19% above projected afternoon output. Sick days down. Fewer equipment incidents in the late shift, when fatigue-related inattention usually peaked. Sections on Hale's provision, on baseline or slightly below. Dragging by 2 in the afternoon the way Galt had described from the beginning. She organized the data into the cleanest table she'd ever written. Single page, every number sourced. Then she wrote a letter, not to Galt, not to the local Pacific Northern office. To the regional superintendent in Helena, the top. She included one question at the end. Not a demand, a question. Because questions were harder to dismiss than statements, and this one answered itself. If your contracted provisioner is costing you 19% of afternoon productivity on a section already behind schedule, what is your exclusivity clause actually worth? She sealed it, handed it to Jasper. Helena, she said. Fastest route. Wait for a receipt of acknowledgement. He looked at the envelope, at her. You're going over Hale's contract. I'm answering a business question on behalf of a railroad that doesn't know it has one, she said. That's all. He left, and she was fairly sure that what she heard from the yard was a 17-year-old trying very hard not to run. 3 nights later, Wren was at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning. Not planning, not writing, just sitting, which was not a thing she did. She was a person who moved from sleep to work and back without ceremony, who had learned young that stillness was a luxury and acted accordingly. But tonight she was simply sitting. Because the truth was this, the account balance wasn't recovering as fast as she'd projected. The Helena letter could take 2 weeks to get a response. Hale's pressure on the supply chain was costing 30% more per order than her original margin had allowed. Opal needed this month's wages to make her banknote payment by the 15th. Wren had done the math. Really done it, and the cushion she'd been counting on was thinner than she'd let herself see before now. Not gone. Not yet, but close enough to the edge that the edge was visible. She was tired. Not in her body. Her body was fine. Her body had been doing hard work her whole life and had opinions about nothing. The other kind of tired. The kind that accumulates when you spend years fighting twice as hard as everyone else just to stand in the same room. The kind that comes from 26 years of being told, in 100 different languages, that you were the wrong amount of person. She heard his boots on the stairs. Reed didn't sleep deeply. She'd noticed that in the past weeks, the way he surfaced quickly when something changed in the house, the way he moved through the dark without hesitation, like a man who had spent years half listening for things to go wrong. He came into the kitchen. Didn't ask anything. Didn't offer anything she hadn't asked for. He put a pot on the stove, made coffee, 2 cups, set one in front of her and sat down across the table with his own, and then he opened his ranch ledger, the cattle accounts, the feed costs, the grazing records, and started going through it. Not because he needed to at 2 in the morning. Because she was going through hers, and this was what he had to offer. The parallel, quiet company of a man who understood that some things needed to be sat with before they could be solved. Wren looked at him across the table. This man who had not asked if she was all right, who had not offered words she didn't need, who had simply shown up and made coffee and opened his books. She looked down at her notebook. Helena response, best case, 12 days, she said. All right, he said. Hale's supply interference is costing us more than I built into the margin. How much more, she told him. He didn't flinch, didn't tell her it would be fine, just asked, can we cover it if the Saturday service holds? Yes, she said. If it holds. It'll hold, he said. He turned a page in his ledger. You make everything hold. She looked at him. He wasn't looking back. His eyes were on the columns in front of him, but something in the set of his shoulders was different from 4 weeks ago. Less loaded. Something that had been shifting gradually, without announcement, had shifted a little more tonight. Reed, he looked up. When Nora died, she said. His face went still. He didn't look away. I could see it in the numbers, she said. Where the year changes. Where the attention went somewhere else. She paused. I'm not asking you to explain it. I just want you to know I understand what happened here. And I'm not trying to fix anything that isn't mine to fix. I'm just here. A long silence. The coffee cooling between them. She would have liked you, Reed said. It wasn't what she'd expected. Nora, he said, she didn't quit either. Not at anything. He looked at his hands. I forgot how to be like that for a while. After. I know, Wren said. You're not forgetting anymore. He looked at her then, fully, the way she'd been learning to look back, without flinching from what was actually there. No, he said, I'm not. Outside, the Montana night held everything in it that Montana nights hold. Space and cold and stars going on past any reasonable use for them. Inside the kitchen, 2 notebooks lay open on the same table, 2 cups of coffee going slowly cold, 2 people sitting with the same problem from different sides of it. Wren picked up her pen, went back to work. She wasn't alone in it. That was new. That was, she realized, the specific thing she hadn't known she was missing until it showed up. Not help exactly, not rescue, nothing so simple. Just this. Someone else in the room. Someone else working. She wrote for another hour. The response from Helena came in 11 days. Jasper brought it at a dead run, which told her everything before she'd broken the seal. Pacific Northern Railroad was initiating a formal review of its provisioning contract with Hale Provisions. The exclusivity clause was suspended pending the productivity analysis. Mrs. Calloway's services were welcome to continue at the current arrangement during the review. Reed read it over her shoulder. Then he read it again. He's going to lose the contract, he said. He's going to lose the contract, she agreed. You did that with a letter and a table of numbers. The numbers did the work. I made sure they landed in front of the right person. He looked at her, and the corner of his mouth moved. All the way this time. Not the beginning of a smile, but the actual thing, which rearranged his face entirely and knocked years off it, and showed her that underneath all that granite and grief and careful economy of expression was a man who had once found things genuinely funny, genuinely good, and had not, despite 3 hard years of practice, entirely lost the capacity for it. Wren, he said. I know, she said. Don't say anything yet. We still have work to do. She turned back to her notebook, but she was smiling too, and neither of them mentioned that. The review took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Pacific Northern auditors going through Hale provision supply records in a Helena office while, 6 miles south of Callaway Creek, the grading work went on, and Wren went on feeding the men who did it. 3 weeks of Galt meeting her at the edge of camp with quiet nods that said more than he would put into words. 3 weeks of Denton Hale not appearing, not sending anyone, not making a single visible move, which was the most unsettling thing he could have done. Because Wren knew what Hale's stillness meant by now. It meant he was thinking, repositioning, finding the angle that the letter to Helena hadn't accounted for. A man who had held a provisioning monopoly for 8 years did not go quiet because he'd accepted defeat. He went quiet because he was deciding which door to come through next. She kept working. Both wagons Monday through Friday. Saturday service in duskfall. Sunday she did the accounts, restocked, planned the coming week. Sleep between midnight and 5. Up before the rooster, which had by now accepted. This was simply how mornings worked at Callaway Creek and adjusted its schedule accordingly. Reed started appearing in the kitchen earlier. Not to talk, not to ask anything. He would come down while it was still dark outside, put the coffee on before she came in, and settle at the far end of the work table with his ranch ledger, the cattle records, the feed accounts, the grazing rotation, and work through his own numbers while she worked through hers. 2 people in the same room, running the same problem from different angles, in a silence that had long since stopped being the silence of 2 strangers, and become something she would have chosen deliberately if someone had offered her a list of options. She didn't say that out loud, but she thought it. Every morning, standing at the stove at 5 in the dark with the stars still fading outside, and a large, quiet man sitting at her kitchen table who didn't feel any need to fill silence with noise just because it was there, she thought. This is the part nobody told me about. Not the hard work. She'd always known about that, had built her entire life around it. But this, the specific texture of not being the only one in the room with the problem. She hadn't known she was missing it until it arrived. The auditor's findings came on a Tuesday. Galt told her himself. He came to the camp's edge while she was setting up that afternoon, hat in hand, with the posture of a man delivering something he'd been waiting to deliver, for longer than was comfortable. Hale Provisions had been overcharging Pacific Northern by 31% above market rate for 3 consecutive years. The exclusivity clause in the contract had functionally prevented any competitive pricing from reaching the railroad's purchasing office. The productivity data Wren had submitted showed a sustained 19% gap in afternoon output between sections she supplied and sections still on Hale's wagon. Denton Hale lost the Pacific Northern contract. All sections, all services, effective immediately. You did it, Galt said. The numbers did it, she said. I just put them where they needed to be. He nodded, looked at the line already forming. Pacific Northern is going to want a formal contract with you. Full crew, both meal services. I know. Hale's going to be angry. Hale can be as angry as he wants, she said. He had access to the same data I had. He just assumed no one would bother organizing it. Galt made a sound that was almost a laugh. Then he put his hat back on and went back to his section. She served 68 portions that afternoon. The coffee ran out early and she didn't apologize for it. The drive home ran through the long Montana evening with $73 in her apron pocket and her notebook open on her knee, already 3 pages into the proposal for the Pacific Northern full crew contract. The sky was doing something she still hadn't found adequate words for. Not orange, not gold. Some color that belonged specifically to this territory at this hour. A color that said stay in a language older than English. She was beginning to understand why people did. She was deep into the contract proposal, 4th page, working through the per-service pricing at scale, when the knock came. Not the door, the gate. The sound of someone who didn't know the ranch well enough to come directly to the house. Reed was already moving before she'd stood up. The man at the gate was older. Thin in the way of people who have always been thin and have stopped thinking about it. He carried a leather satchel and wore a suit that had been well made a decade ago and had since become simply permanent. The kind of clothing that stops being a choice and becomes a fact about a person. He had the careful, deliberate quietness of someone who had spent a professional lifetime delivering significant news in other people's spaces and had learned to carry it without spilling. Mrs. Callaway, he said. My name is Aldous Price. I'm an attorney from Denver. I represent the estate of Emmett Fenn. Wren looked at Reed. Reed looked at the attorney. I don't know an Emmett Fenn, she said. No, Price said. But he knew of you. They sat at the kitchen table, all three of them. Price opened his satchel and produced a document and set it in front of Wren with the careful deliberateness of someone who understood the weight of what he was placing down and wanted that understanding to be visible. Emmett Fenn, 71 years old at the time of his death 7 weeks prior, founder and sole owner of Fenn Provisions, the largest independent food supply company operating in the Rocky Mountain region. Contracts with 4 railroad lines, 11 mining operations, 2 territorial government supply accounts, no surviving children. His wife had preceded him by 5 years. Mr. Fenn amended his will 2 years before he died, Price said. Not at the end. Not in any moment of sentiment or declining health. He was clear-headed and specific, and he told me when he made the amendment that he'd been thinking about it for the better part of a decade. He indicated the document. Wren read it. Read it again. The entirety of Fenn Provisions, all active contracts, the full inventory, the supplier network, 4 wagons, the Helena warehouse lease, the operating accounts, was to pass to the first woman in Montana Territory who had built an independent food service operation from no prior capital, no inherited business, and no spousal financial subsidy, and had sustained gross revenue of $150 per week across a minimum of 3 consecutive weeks, verifiable by account records. Wren looked up. I'm the only one, she said. Not a question. You are the only person in the territory who meets every condition, Price said. I have checked thoroughly. It was not a simple check. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, one of the horses shifted in the yard. The stove ticked as it cooled from the afternoon service. Why, Wren said, quietly. Why did he structure it this way? Price folded his hands on the table. For the first time since he'd arrived, the careful professional surface softened into something more personal. The expression of a man who had been carrying a particular story for a long time and was glad to finally set it down somewhere it belonged. His mother, he said, Cecily Fenn. She ran the kitchen of a boarding house in Hannibal, Missouri, for 33 years, fed every person who came through that establishment, raised Emmett and his 3 brothers on what she earned from it, kept those boys fed and housed through 2 droughts, 1 war, and a flood that took out half the town. He paused. She died in 1871 with $4 to her name. Because everything she had built, the recipes, the supplier relationships, the reputation that kept the boarding house full, all of it belonged to the man who owned the building. She never had the capital to set out independently. Every time she tried to find a way, the doors were arranged so that she couldn't get through them. Wren sat very still. Mr. Fenn built his company the year after she died, Price said. He told me once, and only once, because he wasn't a man who talked about it, that he had spent 40 years constructing the thing his mother should have been permitted to build herself, and he wanted it to go to someone who already understood what that kind of building costs. Silence. Reed was looking at the document. His face had moved through several things in the past few minutes. She knew Fusfus well enough by now to read the sequence, even when he kept it still. This was the look he got when something was too large to process in a single pass, and he was working through it in sections, the way he worked through anything that mattered. What are the outstanding debts on the company? Friend said. Reed turned to look at her. Price opened a second page, $1,100. Supplier accounts, 2 outstanding invoices, and a small equipment loan. Active contracts, annual value, approximately $4,000, if maintained at current volume. She did the arithmetic, didn't reach for the notebook, didn't need to. I need to speak with my husband, she said. Price nodded, stood without being asked. I'll wait outside. He left. The kitchen door closed. Wren and Reed sat across from each other at the table where they had sat every morning for 2 months. Same lamp, same work table, same 2 notebooks, one on each side, open to different pages of the same problem. Everything the same. Nothing the same at all. 1,100 against 4,000, Reed said. I've done the math 6 ways, she said. It comes out the same each time. What do you want to do? She looked at him. I want to take it, but this is your land, your father's ranch. Taking this ties our finances together in a way that's larger than anything we've done yet. If something goes wrong. Wren. He said her name the way he said things that mattered. No performance in it, no preparation. Just the word, placed directly. When has anything you've touched gone wrong? She opened her mouth. The counterfeit bills, he said before she could. You caught them the same night and had them on official record by morning. The axle. Jasper had the part and the fix done in 2 days without losing a service. The flour shortage, you had a Helena supplier confirmed within a week and restructured the menu to absorb the cost difference without dropping a single day. He shook his head slowly. That's not failure, that's work. Work always has problems. You solve them. He held her gaze. Steady. The particular steadiness of a man who has learned that the only way through hard things is to plant your feet and stay present until they resolve. Do you want the company? He said. Yes, she said. Then we take it, he said together. She looked at him for a long moment, at this man who had been unreachable for 3 years before she arrived, who had driven her to the railroad camp on a Thursday morning without asking for explanation and said everything necessary on the way back with almost no words at all, who had come down to the kitchen at 2 in the morning and made coffee and opened his ledger and stayed. Read, she said. Yeah, when I signed that registry, she said, I signed it because I needed somewhere to go, something real to build. I wasn't expecting. She stopped, found the precise words. I didn't come here for what this has become between us. He waited. But I'm glad it became this, she said. A long silence, the lamp burning between them. He reached across the table, slowly, placed his hand over hers. Not gripping, not pulling, just setting it there. The way you set something down that you've been holding a long time and have finally decided can rest somewhere. I wrote to that agency, he said, because I was going under and I'd been going under so long I'd stopped noticing the water. He paused. And then one morning I came into the kitchen and there was coffee already made and biscuits in the oven and 9 men sitting at that table eating like they meant it. He looked at their hands. I forgot what it felt like for a place to be alive. It's both of us, Wren said. It was always going to take both of us. He looked up, and she had the word for his expression then. The word she'd been reaching for since the wagon road from duskfall, through every morning at the stove and every evening over the accounts and the long silence of the Montana nights. Home. He was looking at her the way a person looks at home. Not the place, the feeling. The specific, unrepeatable feeling of being exactly where you belong. She turned her hand over under his, let it rest. Aldous Price came back inside 15 minutes later. Wren was at the stove. Reed was at the table with both ledgers open, his and hers, side by side. And they had already, with the quiet efficiency of 2 people who thought in numbers and trusted each other's, worked through the basic structure of how the Fenn debt would be absorbed and what the first 8 months of the acquisition would look like against the existing Pacific Northern contract income. We'll take it, Wren said, without turning from the stove. Price set his transfer papers on the table. Reed moved the ledgers to make room. I'll need 3 days to prepare the full transfer documents, Price said. Come back Thursday, Wren said. Coffee will be on. He allowed himself a small smile, the first of the evening. Mr. Fenn would have liked you, he said. She turned, looked at him directly. Tell me what she looked like, she said. Cecily. He paused, not expecting the question. I never met her, he said. Emmett described her once, only once, as I said. He told me she was a large woman, strong through the shoulders, hands that were always moving. He said she could feed 40 people on what most cooks would consider barely enough for 20, and she made it taste like there had always been plenty. Wren turned back to the stove. Thursday, she said. Come hungry. She told Opal the next morning, drove to duskfall early, before the day's service began, and sat across from Opal at Opal's own kitchen table, which was a table that had seen hard use and was still solid, the way Opal herself was, and laid it out plainly. What Fenn Provisions was, what the acquisition meant, what Wren was proposing. She wanted Opal to manage the duskfall dining operation, not as an employee drawing wages, as a partner. 20% of the duskfall revenue, independently managed, with the full Fenn supply network behind her to draw from. Opal was quiet for a long time after Wren finished. Then her eyes filled. Not the soft kind of tears that come from sentiment, the hard kind. The kind that rise when something you had quietly stopped expecting shows up anyway, after you'd made your arrangements with its absence. I've never run anything, she said. You've run a household and 2 daughters and 40 acres by yourself since March, Wren said. A dining operation is the same set of problems. The only difference is I'm going to pay you for solving them. Opal pressed the back of her hand to her face. I don't understand why you're doing this, she said. Because someone should have done it for Cecily Fenn 30 years ago and nobody did, Wren said. And I'm not going to be the person who has something to give and decides not to give it. Opal reached across the table and took both of Wren's hands in hers and held them. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to. The Dustfall dining room opened on a Wednesday in late September, not a tent. Not a wagon in a lot. A real building on the empty lot behind Morrison's feed store. Reed had negotiated the purchase with Morrison directly, which Wren had suggested deliberately, because there were parts of this that needed to be his, and she'd learned to see which parts those were. 3 of the Callaway Creek men had framed it up in 11 days, working with the focused energy of people who'd been eating well for 3 months and had reserves to draw from. 6 tables, 40 chairs. A kitchen Wren had drawn out 3 separate times before the workflow satisfied her. A menu of 7 items, all of them honest, all priced fairly, because she was not in the business of extracting money from people who didn't have much of it. She was in the business of feeding them well enough that they came back and told someone else. Opal ran it from the first day, with Cecily serving, and a third hire, a quiet woman named Agnes, who had cooked for a climbing camp for 4 years and had very specific opinions about coffee that Wren found immediately useful. On the opening Wednesday, Wren stood in the doorway at noon and watched every table fill. She let herself stand there for a full minute, just looked. A room full of people eating. Miners, ranch hands, 2 families, the Brixton hotel owner in his usual corner taking pot roast with the expression of a man reassessing his position on several things at once. The particular satisfied sound of people getting what they actually needed, which was different from any other kind of sound a room could make. She'd started with a cold kitchen and $51, and a cast-iron skillet her mother had said never let her down. This was what it had become. Opal appeared at her elbow, both of them looking at the room. "Your mother's skillet," Opal said. She'd heard the story by now. "She pressed it into my hands the morning I left Dayton," Wren said. Said it was the only thing she owned that had never failed her. Smart woman, the smartest person I knew. Wren looked at the room. She would have built something like this, if anyone had given her the space to do it. Opal was quiet. "I'm giving you the space," Wren said. "Don't waste it." "I won't," Opal said. Simple, the tone of a woman who meant exactly what she said and knew the difference between meaning it and saying it. The ledger balanced in November, first time in 3 years. Wren sat at the kitchen table in the evening with the lamp on and the ranch quiet around her, and entered the final number in the column with the same hand she'd used to sign her name in the Duskfall magistrate's office 4 months before. Careful, deliberate, every figure placed exactly where it belonged. She closed the book, sat with it for a moment. Reed came in from the barn. She heard him at the pump, heard him dry his hands on the cloth by the door. He came to the table, poured 2 cups of coffee without asking, set one beside the closed ledger and sat down across from her. "Done," she said. "Done," he said. He looked at the closed book, then at her. "My father built this place," he said, "and I let it come apart. Not because the land failed or the cattle failed or the weather took more than its share." He looked at his hands. "Because I got quiet in a way I couldn't find my way back out of, and I kept telling myself it was grief, which it was, but grief was also just." He stopped. Quitting. Without using that word for it, she looked at this man. This large, plain-spoken, stubbornly honest man who held himself accountable in the same direct way he held everything else, without excuses, without softening, without asking to be let off anything he believed he owed. "You stopped quitting," she said. "That's what matters now." "You stopped me," he said. "You stopped yourself," she said. "I just gave you something worth stopping for." He looked up. That expression again. The one she'd found the word for at the kitchen table with Aldous Price. Home. He stood, moved around the table, stood in front of her, close enough that she had to look up at him, which she rarely had to do with anyone. And then he did the most unhurried thing she had ever seen Reed Callaway do. This man who was always in motion, always already thinking toward the next task, always somewhere slightly ahead of the present moment. He stopped, completely, put his hand against the side of her face, held it there, looking at her with the full patient attention he gave to things that needed to be done right and couldn't be rushed. "I don't know how to say most of it," he said. "You don't have to," she said. "Wren, Reed." She put her hand over his where it rested against her face. "I know." He bent down, pressed his forehead to hers, and stayed there, just stayed. The way he stayed when something mattered, fully present, not calculating what came next, not already moving toward the door. The kitchen was warm. The lamp was burning low. Outside, the Montana November pressed cold and enormous against the window. Stars thick and indifferent and beautiful in the way of things that have been there long before you arrived and will be there long after. Inside was exactly the right size. The supper that night was the best she'd made at that table. Not because the food was different from other nights. Roast chicken with gravy, potatoes, cornbread. An apple cake Cecily had showed her from Opal's recipe, which had turned out to have strong opinions about cinnamon that Wren agreed with completely. Nothing she hadn't made before, nothing unfamiliar. But the room was different. 9 men who had been eating cold beans from a can 4 months ago were loud and settled and comfortable in the specific way of people who have been fed well and worked hard and know the place they're in is solid ground. The kind of noise that a room makes when the people in it have stopped bracing for things to go wrong. Big Shaw ate 2 full plates and a substantial piece of apple cake and set his fork down with the deliberateness of a man making an announcement. "Finest meal," he said, "since my mother's table. And I don't say that to anyone." He said it every week now, with the same gravity each time. Wren had come to understand that this was the highest currency Big Shaw possessed, and he spent it on her cooking without reservation or inflation. Jasper ate 3 portions of everything and did not apologize for any of it. Near the end of the meal, he stood up. Just stood up, right there at the supper table with quite watchful face and those dark eyes that caught everything, and cleared his throat once. The table went still, because Jasper did not make speeches. Everyone at that table knew this about him the way they knew the weather patterns and the fence lines. It was simply a fact of the landscape. So when he stood, the room paid attention. "Mrs. Calloway," he said. "Wren," she said. He looked at her. "Wren." He seemed to consider the name for a moment, as if trying it out in a new context. "When I got here 14 months ago, this was a place still deciding whether it was going to make it. The men were good. Reed was." He paused, glanced at Reed. "Working on it." Quiet laughter moved around the table. "And then you came," he said, "and the kitchen woke up, and the money started making sense, and everyone stopped looking like they were waiting for the next bad thing." He looked at her directly. With the full honest attention he gave very little. "I wasn't planning to stay here long. I was passing through to somewhere else. I don't know where that somewhere else was going to be." A pause. "I'm not looking for it anymore." He sat down fast, the way a person sits when they've used up everything they had and want the attention to move along. The table was quiet for a moment. Then Reed stood, and the room went absolutely still, the different stillness that falls when something genuinely unexpected happens. Because Reed Calloway did not stand at the supper table. Reed Calloway communicated through ledgers and fence repairs and coffee made before you came downstairs and a hand placed over yours in the lamplight. He did not make toasts. He did not make speeches. Everyone in that room understood this the way they understood the slope of the pasture and which gate stuck in wet weather. So when he stood, nobody moved. He raised his coffee cup. "To my wife," he said. His voice was steady and low, and each word was placed with the precision of a man who chose words the way he chose tools. Only the right one, only when needed, only when nothing else would do. "My partner. The woman who walked into a cold kitchen and made it the warmest place I've known in 3 years. Who kept better books than I did when it was my ranch to keep. Who never once..." He stopped. Something worked in his face. "Who never once acted like any of it was more than she could carry." He looked at her. "Best bargain I ever made," he said. "And the only one I didn't deserve." 9 men raised their cups. Big Shaw said "Hear, hear" with the full force of a man who had resisted warmth for 53 years and had finally stopped finding it worth the effort. Jasper said "Hear, hear" and caught his elbow on his cup and grabbed it before it tipped and turned a color that was visible even in lamplight, which made everyone laugh, including Reed, the real laugh, the one that didn't happen often, and when it did transformed his face into something younger and less weathered and entirely unguarded. Wren raised her own cup. She looked at the table. These men, this room, this kitchen that had been cold and silent and losing the argument with time when she'd walked into it 4 months ago, and was now this. Full and warm and loud with the particular noise of people who had stopped waiting for everything to fall. She felt something settle in her chest, all the way down. Completely. The way things settle when they've finally found the level they were always trying to reach. Like a foundation that had been poured slowly, carefully, over 4 months of early mornings and long nights, and $40 afternoons and 2 in the morning coffee, and a man who showed up and stayed, and had now, at last, fully set. She drank her coffee. Later, after the men had gone, after the dishes were done, after the kitchen had gone quiet, the way it went, quiet at the end of good days, which was different from the quiet it had held when she arrived. Wren sat alone at the table, lamp burning low, notebook open. She turned to the first page, the page she'd written in Dayton, Ohio, the night before she'd left. Before the train, before Montana, before any of it, the handwriting of a 26-year-old woman who had been holding herself very straight, because that was the only posture available to her when everything else was uncertain. One line. Find somewhere big enough for everything you are. She looked at it for a long time. Then she picked up her pen and drew a single line beneath it, not because she needed to mark it, because it deserved to be marked. Because the woman who had written it, alone in a room in Ohio with $51 and a skillet and a notebook full of plans, had been right, and being right about the things that matter most is worth acknowledging when the proof finally arrives. She closed the notebook, blew out the lamp. In the dark of the kitchen at Cathaway Creek, with the November stars pressing low and bright against the glass, and the wind moving through the last of the autumn grass, in long slow waves she could hear but not see, Wren Adler. Cathaway sat for one more minute in the place she had built, and was glad. She had always been glad of work, every day of her life from the morning she was 15 and her mother got sick, and somebody had to start paying attention. She had been glad of the work. It had been the one constant, the one language that never changed its meaning. But this was the first time she had been glad not just of the work itself, but of what the work had made. The table it had built, the men around it, the man who came downstairs at 2 a.m. and made coffee and stayed. The kitchen that smelled, finally, like somewhere that intended to go on. The iron skillet hung on the wall above the stove after that, not stored, not wrapped, not set aside for occasions that might or might not come, hung there on a good nail in plain view, where Wren could see it every morning when she came down before dawn to start the fire. Her mother had pressed it into her hands and said, "It's the only thing I own that never let me down." Wren had carried it across 4 states, and now it was exactly where it had always been going. Home,